Hi, and welcome to this video of how I changed my front brakes. They comprised of brake calipers, brake discs and ceramic brake pads. First, a disclaimer. I'm not a mechanic. I have no idea what I'm doing with any aspect of day-to-day life. I'm an idiot, and I guess most things. I never read instructions, nor do I follow correct protocols or methods. If you follow any of my advice, and you end up face planting a tree, then it's not my fault. You should always get brakes serviced by a competent mechanic, or at least by someone who knows what they are doing. No one should ever listen to me. If you do follow any advice in this video, then it's not my fault. Let's get started. First, lock the rear wheels by putting the car in park, and applying the hand brake or emergency brake. This will prevent the car from rolling, which we work on it. Just a precaution. Then, pop your hood or bonnet. Remove the cap for your brake fluid and just let it rest on the hole. This is so we can remove the built-up pressure from the system. The brake fluid reservoir is always on the side where the steering wheel is. I'm in the UK, so it's on the left side. With the wheel still on the ground, crack the wheel nuts so they are loose, but don't remove them. This will make it easier to remove the wheel when it's jacked up. Now we can lift the wheel that we want to change the brakes on. I'm using a bottle jack, which is easier for me. I put it on the wishbone or strut, under the spring connection. It's probably wrong, but it makes a good secure lift. I then position an axle stand as a backup, in case the jack fails. Now remove the wheel, and let's take a look at our brakes. You can see a lot of rust on the top of the brake disc, and it's a little thin, although not dangerously so. Although you can't see the brake pads, they are quite thin and are borderline a fail if it were to go for its yearly inspection. With a 14mm socket wrench, undo both of the caliper bolts. Undo them all the way and remove them, keep them somewhere safe. If you struggle with them being too tight, spray them with WD-40 and leave them for an hour. Now we can remove the brake caliper. It might be tight, mine was. You may need to use a little brute force. But if you're keeping the caliper, don't go crazy. When the caliper comes off, you're meant to secure it or hang it somewhere so that strain isn't put onto the brake hose. I never really did that, but you should. I just let it hang. To remove the brake pads, just pull them out. You can see they are not too bad really, but would need doing soon. Nice rusty piston marks on the back. Next, we need to remove the caliper carrier plate, if that's what it's called. This will allow us to remove the disc. There are two larger bolts on the back of the disc which secures the bracket. Spray WD-40 on the bolts and leave them for a bit. Then remove them using a socket wrench or ratchet. If any bolts are too stiff, use a hammer and hit the handle to loosen it off. Works a treat, but be careful not to round the bolt. Now here comes the loud part. Most discs I've done have a small screw that keeps it onto the hub. These do not. Instead, you just hit the disc towards you to remove it. Obviously this is going to be loud, and you need quite a bit of brute force to get it off. I'm not keeping these discs, which are heavily scored anyway, so I'm using a metal hammer. A rubber hammer would be more appropriate. You can also turn the wheels so you can get a better swing onto the back of the disc. These hubs have a small O-ring seal which stops dirt and such from getting into the joint, where the disc meets the hub. Take it off and put it to one side. I never reused it, but I'll show you that later. Take a wire brush and give the surface of the wheel hub a good scrubbing. This is just a good habit I've seen mechanics do. Apply some WD-40 and let it sit for a bit. Now we are ready to fit the new brake disc. Slot the new brake disc onto the hub. I tried to fit the seal again, but couldn't figure it out. I had a better solution anyway. Refit the brake caliper and pad bracket, securing it with the two large bolts from the back. Make them nice and tight. Now slot the new brake pads into their slots so that they are nice and flush against the disc. The one with a metal clip goes on the back of the disc, clip at the top. The other one with no clips goes on the outside. If you are keeping the calipers, then using a clamp, press the pistons back into their recesses. This is why we remove the brake fluid cap, as it would be very hard if you had to fight against the pressure. If your calipers are okay and you can use them, then skip ahead to where I fit the new calipers onto the discs. Essentially, you just slot them in place and tighten the two bolts. Now it's time to fit some new sexy calipers. I bought these after my original brake calipers were not playing ball. One had a cracked piston, and the other had torn rubber boots. I paid £83 for both from eBay. The calipers come with a sachet of grease. The grease should be put on all surfaces inside the caliper that will touch the brake pads. Also, the piston rubbers should be greased up too. Once you've greased it up, slide the caliper over the brake pads and refit the two bolts for the caliper. The bleed nipple should be on top, and the pistons should be at the back. If you struggle to get the caliper past these bolt holes, you can just push them back with your fingers. They are spring-loaded. I don't have a picture or video of this, but it's very important. Take a clamp or some mole grips and use it to pinch the rubber brake hose going to the old caliper. This prevents the brake fluid from just draining out of the system when you remove the brake hose. On the old caliper, remove the banjo bolt that secures the metal block to the caliper. It should come undone easily. When you remove it, make sure you take the copper washers from the old caliper and the top of the block. There'll also be some brake fluid that leaks out, catch that in a container. Remove the rubber plug on the new caliper, that stops debris from getting inside. Then put the banjo fitting onto the new caliper. You're supposed to use new copper washers on the top and bottom of the bolt, but I didn't have any. So I just reused the old ones. Tighten the bolt back into the caliper, making sure it's nice and tight. Now we need to bleed the brake fluid through. Replace this brake reservoir cap and make sure it's secure. Ignore my catch can, I'm doing something to it, I know it's not connected. Now pump the brakes so they are quite hard. They'll be soft to start with, don't panic. We need to build up pressure in the lines. Go back to the caliper and remove the clamps that you placed on the line. This will allow the fluid to flow to the new caliper. Now loosen the bleed nipple with a wrench. Once you've loosened it, you don't need to keep opening and closing it with a wrench, you can use your fingers during the bleeding process. Open the bleed nipple enough so that pressure comes through. After a little while, close the nipple and then pump the brakes again to build the pressure back up. Repeat this process of pumping the brakes, opening the nipple, closing it and pumping the brakes and so on. Make sure you don't run out of brake fluid and keep it topped up in the reservoir. It'll take time for the fluid to come out of the new caliper, as it has to fill a chamber within. Once it starts to come out, you should get a steady stream or dripping like this. Look at the fluid at the point it leaves the nipple. There should be no air in there. If there is, continue on with the process until it's clear and air-free. Then just tighten the bleed nipple so it's secure. Replace the dust cover onto the nipple. Remember that O-ring? Well, this is what I did. I took some gasket making sealant and just put it around the disc where the O-ring was. It makes a totally weatherproof seal and should be just as effective, if not more so. All done, now you can just put the wheel back on the car, tighten the nuts firmly and then lower the car down. Make sure you tighten the nuts all the way so they don't come loose. You can jack up the other side and do that will too. They say that pads and discs should always be done as a pair. Feel free to like and subscribe this video, I'd appreciate it. I hope it helped and I hope you saved money and learned something by doing this yourself. Safe driving.